Good morning, crime community. I'm here to read about Percy Shelley by Jacqueline Mulhallen. This is called The Necessity of Atheism. When Charles Grove came to stay over the Christmas holidays, Shelley learned that there was no hope of his relationship with Harriet being resumed. Shelley was so distraught that his sister Elizabeth would follow him when he went out shooting, as she was worried he might shoot himself. Shelley had hoped to invite Hogue, who had just had a broken love affair, to Field Place and introduce him to Elizabeth, but she was not interested. Anyway, his father would not allow him to J.J. Stockdale, the publisher of St. Irvyne, no connection to the Dublin Stockdale, had suggested to Timothy that Hogue's religious views made him an unsuitable friend for his son. But when Timothy heard some friends in the north of England that Hogue's family was very respectable, he invited Hogue for Easter. Shelley's letters to Hogue swerve from religion to Harriet, love and marriage, and back again, showing some disturbance of mind. Shelley wrote that he was convinced of monogamy. A monarchy is the only form of government in a certain degree which a lover ought to live under, although he added, I am convinced that equally will be the attendant of more advanced and ameliorated state of society, the view Godwin expressed in Political Justice. He believed himself to be benefiting society by enlightening people about religion, but for this he was welcomed and outcast. Though he resented Christianity as being responsible for his break with Harriet, he still believed in a true cause, the soul of the universe, the intelligent and necessarily benefit actuating principle. This I believe in, he asked. When do we see effects without causes? A relationship with Godwin insists upon. Without first cause, the strongest argument in support of the future state after life after death instantly becomes annihilated. This correspondence became on December 20th, and by January 18th, 1811, Hogue had convinced himself of atheism. Shelley wrote back that he had now had a systematic cudgel, which had probably the core of the argument, but which put in the necessity of atheism. Because Slater and Monday could not publish this pamphlet, it had been printed it himself and C&W Phillips. Both Shelley and Hogue were writing to clergymen, even bishops, asking their opinions on religious matters. They hoped that the clergymen would be unable to answer the questions, and they would then follow it up by sending their pamphlet. Although they wrote under pseudonyms and under the correspondence for the air of the practical joke Shelley loved, Hogue insisted that the inquiry was not frivolous, and certainly the discussion between the two friends was serious. But because of the 1797 seditious meetings and treason acts, those who wanted to write about atheism were risking persecution. Martin Priestman sums up the options: to publish and be damned, to write and not be published, to publish under a pseudonym, and to write with enough of the air to disinterested scholarship to avoid persecution. Hogue and Shelley appeared to have been attempting to combine the last two, but as they were teenage students, they were unable to carry off the final one as William Godwin had done. Shelley knew that publishing The Necessity of Atheism was dangerous, and he wrote that he was proceeding carefully, and we are afraid of the legislature's power with respects to heretics. I was afraid that I should be suspected of author. On the March 2nd, Shelley wrote to James Henry Leigh Hunt, editor of the radical journal, The Examiner, to congratulate him on the acquittal of a charge of libel for publishing an article about flogging in the army. He proposed a meeting of enlightenment and unprejudiced members of the community to form a society to resist the coalition of the enemies of liberty. This society would presumably include atheists and free thinkers, and began to fight back against the laws against libel and sedition, organized in the plan of the Illuminati, an organization which had been successful in achieving reforms in Europe, particularly in Bavaria. Shelley had read them in Joseph Barrell's antagonistic history with an awareness of the author's prejudice, and knew that some of the Illuminati's views had influenced the United Irishmen when they were obliged to become a secret society. Shelley explained to Leigh Hunt that he would, in all probability, have his father's seat in Parliament when he was 21, but meanwhile, because he was at the university, I dare not publicly to avow all of that I think, but the time will come when I hope that my every endeavor, insufficient as it may be, will be directed to the advancement of liberty. Shelley perhaps hoped to be a radical MP with the influential examiner on his side, but Hunt did not reply. The letters show that Shelley had not broken with his father or class then, but he was well aware of the consequences of publishing The Necessity of Atheism under his own name. The Necessity of Atheism, one of the earliest pamphlets on the subject to have been published in England, it argued that belief is not a voluntary act since it is not regulated by reason, or so it is a mistake to consider disbelievers to be criminals. In the absence of personal experience, it does not follow that one should believe the testimony of another who claims to have seen God, since it is possible they were deceived or mistaken, and therefore there should be no proof that there is a God. The argument that God must be created, the universe, is not reasonable, as the universe might always have existed. As if was caused by something, there was no need to assume that the cause was God. The influence of Locke's essay can be seen. Hogg states that his Shelley's reading and careful analysis of this and the arguments of David Hume was the basis for the little book, although it was Shelley who actually wrote it. A Reverend John Walker persuaded Slater to burn all the copies when he saw it in the bookshop window. Hogg and Shelley had also sent copies to clergymen, professors, and fellows of the colleges, including the aggressive Copplestone. Shelley later assumed that Copplestone had reported him to the University College, but Shelley and Hogg were probably generally suspected. Sharp thought that they wrote it. The master of the college and 2 or 3 fellows sent for Shelley and asked him in a rude, abrupt, and insolent tone, was he the author? Shelley would not answer, as the question was not just or lawful. He was told to leave the college early the next morning. Hogg then went to the master and fellows and asked them to reconsider and asked if he had written it. Hogg, later a barrister who kept to point out that they were answered, they would be either to lie or incriminating themselves. A week or so later, Charlotte Grove noted that Shelley had been expelled from Oxford for atheism. This was not so, as the college records show, but there were clearly the popular view which has persisted. Shelley, in his account of the affair to Godwin in January 1812, said that he was told that if he denied it, i.e. repudiated it, no more would be said, but he could not do so. Hogg said that this was not true, but it was suggested by Timothy Shelley's consistent attempts to get Shelley to change his opinions. Shelley and Hogg left Oxford together, though Shelley had time to say goodbye to his friend Halliday beforehand. With this publication, Shelley had made a complete break with his old life, with his education, family, and friends. His career had planted for himself was now impossible. He probably thought he had been sufficiently cautious to his anonymity, but he reckoned without what Hogg described as an affair of party. This does not mean a simple Whig-Tory rivalry, but a deep-seated hatred with which the church and the king, party entrenched at Oxford, had for anyone who questioned their views. While they turned a blind eye to drunken orgies, the college authorities had expelled 2 hardworking, intelligent students. They and their supporters, including a Robert Clark, who reported to Hogg's father, justified their expulsion with a range of contradictory attacks to both Shelley and Hogg. They were sorry for Shelley, but not Hogg, or for Hogg, but not Shelley. Shelley was always been odd, even suspected of insanity. He dressed like a scarecrow. Both he and Hogg dressed differently from each other and did everything in their power to show singularity. No one regretted their departure. They also described Shelley as insubordinate, a ringleader in minor mischief, whose departure ensured quiet within the college. At the last was the case when clearly Shelley's views interested the other students. A ringleader as follows. Shelley's abundantly liberal friends at Oxford clearly regretted his departure. Rowe would hardly have kept such an inconsequential note otherwise, and the authorities feared the influence of Hogg and Shelley, never the group. That's the end of the lesson today about the influence of atheism in the institutionalization of Oxford. If you think there's any truth and like to what's going on today, we will continue reading about Shelley and perhaps Miss Barrett Browning in the future. Have a nice day.